Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, we're going to be talking about Ramadan. Now, for those of you who don't know, starting from February 28th, just after sunset, Ramadan begins. And what is Ramadan? Ramadan is the Islamic fast that happens in the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, or the Hijri calendar. Ramadan lasts for approximately 30 days and involves Muslims around the world choosing to abstain from all foods, all liquids, and all sex, actually, from when the sun starts to rise to when the sun starts to set. So to all my Muslim friends, Ramadan Mubarak. I thought I'd do a video explaining some interesting facts about Ramadan from a Christian paradigm and compare it to the way that Christians fast. Since this year, Ramadan and Lent are gonna overlap, since Lent starts on March the 5th, at least in the Gregorian calendar. So if you're a practicing Muslim, a realistic practical day during Ramadan might be waking up very, very early. And to be fair, if you're a practicing Muslim, then as part of your Fajr prayer, you will be doing this anyway. But since you're not allowed to eat after the sun has risen that day, and you have to wait for roughly 12 hours, depending on where you live, because in some parts of the world, the sun stays up longer, and in some parts of the world, it stays up shorter, and in some parts of the world, like the Greenlands, it never actually sets, which I guess is a bit of a problem if you're a practicing Muslim, but I don't think there's many Muslims in Greenland yet, so guess that's okay. But as a practicing Muslim, and you're starting your normal day during Ramadan, you're probably going to have a lot of food, precisely because you're not going to be able to eat for what could be 12 or more hours. So practically, you're going to have a very big meal. And this is a very common practice among many Muslims. They will, during Ramadan, they'll wake up before the sun rises and they will have a communal meal with their family and their extended family and the friends of their family to prepare them for the day ahead. So a big calorie intake before the start of the fast. Okay, then what's the next step? Well, if you're going to be fasting for 12 hours, it's going to be really difficult if you're awake for those 12 hours. It would be a lot simpler if you actually had a long rest and you continued to sleep for longer than you normally would during the other months of the year. This is why it's a common practice among Muslims to go take a nap. And nap for as long as you possibly can if you're able to, because you're not going to feel hungry, you're not going to feel tempted to eat if you're not awake. Seems pretty clever and basic when you think about it. So if you manage to have a long nap and you wake up at, say, 1 in the afternoon, then it might not be so bad and you only have like 5 hours of fasting, so it becomes a lot more feasible. And keep in mind, you're not permitted to drink water or any liquids during this time. Food is one thing, but water, especially if you live in somewhere like Egypt, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, I'm just thinking of like any typical hot place in the world, like the entire continent of Africa basically, you're probably going to want a drink, but you can't. So that nap is almost essential in many parts of the world. But there is some relief. There is some relief that is built in to Ramadan. And I actually got told this by people I used to work with that used to work with Muslims many decades ago. Muslims are permitted, as part of their Sharia, their laws that dictate how they practice their faith, that they are permitted to eat during Ramadan while traveling. If you're traveling somewhere, there are ways in which you can eat during that traveling. Because obviously back then, if you're traveling and you've got some camels or some other livestock and you can't actually eat for many hours, you might collapse of exhaustion, which is quite dangerous. So there are provisions for the travelers to eat. There are cases of Muslims in London, for example, that during their lunch break will choose to go, during Ramadan, go to the Circle Line on the London Underground and choose to ride the Circle Line all the way around. Of course, it goes in a big circle, so you'll eventually end up arriving where you started from. And during that period, they will eat food because it's permissible to do so. Even if, technically, they're not actually going anywhere. They're just going in a big circle for the sake of being able to say, look, I'm traveling, so it's permissible for me to have lunch. So what happens after the sun sets? After the fast is done with, Muslims around the world can relax because the fasting period is over for the day. They can have their dinner, their tea, and fill themselves up with food. Well, again, traditionally, Muslims will make a very communal meal and will often spend a good amount of time preparing for this communal meal with their family, extended family and friends, to celebrate the fact that the feast period is over for that day. So what does this mean practically for Muslims? It means that Muslims around the world have variable length fasting during Ramadan, depending on where they live. So some Muslims will have to fast 12, 13, 14 hours, whereas other Muslims, it might just be 6, 7, or 8 hours. So you definitely want to be in a place where the sun sets quickly and the days are quite short. We also know that although the amount of food being eaten during this period is significantly lower than what Muslims would normally eat when they're not in Ramadan, it does lead to excessive gorging both before the sun rises and after the sun sets. And if you can imagine, if you know in advance that you're not going to be able to eat for many hours, you're going to eat as much as you absolutely can, so you're not starving 6, 7, or 8 hours in during the fast. In fact, there are articles online that are targeted towards Muslim women that try to give advice on how Muslim women can lose weight during Ramadan. Which, if you think about it, shouldn't really even be a thing, because if you're a practicing Muslim and you're in Ramadan, then you should actually just lose weight, right? Like if you're fasting, surely you will lose weight. You don't need to worry about it. But because there is a common practice of eating large amounts of food before the fast and after the fast, it results basically in feasting twice a day. And if you're feasting twice a day, you're probably going to put weight on. It's also known that the amount of consumption of certain foods actually increases during Ramadan. There is actually an increased demand for certain foods during Ramadan. Not really how it's supposed to work, but again, if you're fasting before and afterwards, then it kind of makes sense. But what about Christian fasting? Do Christians fast? Is it similar to Ramadan? How long do they fast for? Well, for Christians, there's a tendency to think that the way that Christians fast is a bit sort of like a New Year's resolution, where people in January all start going to the gym for precisely 2 months and then quit. And it's kind of like a promise to get in shape, but it doesn't really manifest itself. It just means that gym memberships in January and February go up. And it's kind of like that, in which Christians say, I'm going to give up chocolate for a while. And then they give up chocolate for a while, and then they probably celebrate afterwards by eating lots of chocolate. No, that's not a Christian fast. That's more of a way that you actually encourage children to think about fasting when they're young. You take something that you know they like chocolate, and you try to explain that, well, to begin thinking about fasting, you might want to think about what it's like to not have that for a while. What's strange is how we teach children how to think of fasting and get them ready for it when they're older is actually how a lot of Christian and non-religious people today in the West think fasting is. But the truth is actually a lot more detailed and full of tradition and history and variety actually among different Christian denominations. Christians have something called the liturgical calendar. For the whole year, a Christian's life is guided towards reflection upon certain events that occur as part of the biblical themes. So, for example, right now, starting on March the 5th, for Christians who follow the Gregorian calendar, which if you're watching this video, I'm going to guess it's probably most of you. On March the 5th, for 40 days, Christians will be practicing Lent. Lent is a kind of fast that mimics Christ's fast when he walked through the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. And like our Muslim friends, there are similarities. For Christians, we choose to lower our intake of food, just like Muslims do, or at least in theory, just like they do. The difference for the Christians, however, is that Christians do not have traditions of feasting throughout Lent or Advent or any other major fast of the year. The Christian fast focuses on two things: limiting what you consume of everything, liquids and foods, but also increasing prayer. Because if you don't increase the prayer, you're not actually fasting as such, you're basically just dieting. And dieting doesn't really do much for you unless your plan is just to lose weight. But as part of the spiritual life of a Christian, we're called to pray endlessly as part of the Christian life and as part of what it means to live out a Christian life. So during Lent, Christians limit their food intake and their liquid intake, and they increase the amount of prayer time. One common form of fasting is the Eastern Orthodox fast. This involves giving up dairy products, meat, fish, oils, and alcohol. Which, if you think about it, is kind of achieved with a vegan diet, except vegans probably wouldn't let you eat honey. but honey is permissible on this diet, so you can have honey. A Roman Catholic style of fast would be to decrease all intake of foods and liquids, but only to limit the intake of meat on Fridays. And this is why there's a sort of common understanding that Roman Catholics eat fish on Fridays, because they're not prohibited to eat meat during Lent on Fridays. Now, with a Christian fast, Christians fast for 6 days. And what I mean by that is Christians will fast Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But Christians won't fast on a Sunday. Every Sunday during Lent, during Advent, or any other period of feasting, Christians will actually not fast on Sunday. And that is because Sunday is a revered day as the day that Christ resurrected, and it is the first day of the liturgical week. Another fact is that the Christian fasts of Lent are started by something called Ash Wednesday. So you'll notice that March the 5th lands on a Wednesday. This is the starting date to which Christians will start fasting. It's often marked by going to a church and participating in communion, where instead of just being a normal liturgical service with communion, there's a special event in which the burned ashes, usually crosses that are made out of palm trees, are burnt up, grounded into ash, and then all of the congregation, those who attend the church, will go up and the priest will mark the sign of the cross on your forehead. This is the mark of the beginning of the Christian's walk in fasting for the next 40 days. Not just to lower the consumption of food and drink, but to increase our time in prayer and to give more of our life to our spiritual needs rather than our physical needs. You might be familiar with something called Pancake Day, or by its more sort of technical name of either Shrovetide or Shrove Thursday. This is a tradition that came about where Christians, in preparation for Lent, knowing they're likely going to be prohibited from eating certain foods, as well as lowering their intake of food generally, would take whatever ingredients they have in their pantries and use them to make what they can and consume it before Ash Wednesday starts and the fast starts. That kind of came into a tradition of people make pancakes because you have eggs, you have flour, you have whatnot, really convenient to make pancakes. So the next time you think of Pancake Day, remember its history as being a precursor to one's spiritual walk in Lent as a fast. So just to recap, with the Islamic fast, it is around 30 days. With Lent, it's 40 days. With the Islamic fast, it varies depending on what country you live in and when the sun rises and when the sun sets, which differs depending on where you live. For the Christian fast of Lent, it's universal everywhere because it's about lowering your intake generally, and it isn't based on the position of the sun during the day. In the Muslim Ramadan fast, it's common for Muslims to have large meals both before the sun rises and after the sun sets. With the Christian fasting of Lent, Christians don't have daily feasting, but commit themselves to a prolonged period of sections of 6 days to lower their intake generally. So, having said that, I'll be doing the Lenten fast this year, and I very much hope you guys would join me in doing so. Let me know down in the comments as a Christian what it means for you to fast, and God bless you all. I hope you have a great day. If you're not a Christian yet, then today's the day. You can email me with any questions you have about the Christian faith. My email is chris@speakerscorner@gmail.com. You can find it in the box down below. And I wish you all a happy fast. God bless you all. Take care.